Thanks so much, Anne, for taking the time to join.
Well, thank you. It's great to talk with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yes.
So I guess where we should start is if you would tell us a little bit about your work and the nature of your work.
Yes. Well, first, my name is Anne Gryczan, and I teach and work in the context of the ego mind versus infinite consciousness. And what the heck does that mean? I'm going to tell you. Because it's completely pertinent to each of us in our daily lives and in our potential as human beings as well. Mm-hmm. So, I realize I should tell you something, a little story before to set context for this. Sure. When I was about 12 or so, might have been 11 or 12, I was sitting at the dining room table, not doing anything in the middle of the afternoon. Nobody's around. I'm just sitting there. It's a summer day. And all of a sudden, I had the experience of being infinite. The sky, the planets, everything. I was everything. I was all that is. And I thought, there was no thought, but it was like a remembering. It's like, oh, how could I have forgotten this? How could I have forgotten this? As if I had been in some kind of weird little box on wheels or something and thought that's what I was. And so then the experience left and there I was. And, what do you do with something like that? And when you're 11, you don't do anything with it. But it changed my life forever. And I knew somehow whatever this is, whatever I'm walking around in, this is not what I am. And so I was always searching. And even as a teenager, when I was still living in my parents' house, I was searching for what is this greater reality? And I would try to find things like I found what are they called? A shopping mall guru. And it was just this guy who had all these sort of suburban housewives following him and me, this 15-year-old sitting there. And so there was each thing after each thing that I was looking for. But I always knew we can remember who we are. I know we can remember who we are. And so that has been what my path turned out to be. And basically, I kind of fumbled and failed my way along for quite a while for a few years until really I was pretty much of a mess, if you can imagine. Had a lot of psychological problems, had a lot of fears, a lot of anger. I just wasn't in good shape. And this was about my early 20s. I went to a lot of therapists and I would say to them, I'm in despair. And nothing really helped, although some of it was sort of helpful. But finally, what I did is I thought, well, I'll just let this despair, which felt like something black closing in on me, I will just let this have me. So wow. What? I'll just let it have me, because it felt like if this gets me, it will extinguish me. So I said, okay. And part of it was out of despair, like I just give up. But part of it was there was sort of a curiosity. It's like, well, then what? Then what? And so I did. And what happened is that I came into an experience of love and openness and life. And I realized, I can just walk through that. So I kept doing it because I had a zillion problems. And so that I want to kind of explain the work now a little bit, but I wanted to give a little bit of context, because that's what the work is about. Is that what we really are is, of course, not the ego mind, but that is what we all believe we are. We all believe that. Even though we think we don't believe it, we do. We really do. When it gets down to it, right. We all believe that. But we can address this at the deepest level. So what I mean by the ego mind is what we think we are, what we think is reality. So we all have a sense of what we mean by ourselves. And we have our thoughts, our emotions, our history, our culture, our perspective, all these things. So this is reality as far as we know. And yet, what we can find out if we really look at that, if we look at every thought, every piece of history, every little thing that is making up this reality, we can see that it's a construct. It's a construct. So we can really look at that construct, and once we can really see the construct, we can kind of see what its dynamic is. And once we can see its dynamic, like how it operates, what its underlying beliefs are, what its assumptions are, then we can go beyond it. So I think I had to draw you a picture. I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but there's a whiteboard feature on here, so I think I'll do that.
Cool.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to do a picture. Okay, so this is a picture of infinite consciousness.
Uh-huh.
So infinite consciousness has the nature of infinity, of potential, creation, life. It has the nature of love. It is all present. It is that thing that we hear about and that I experienced one time, that I described. So that's infinite consciousness. And that is actually what we really are. So now I'm going to draw a picture. This is the ego mind.
Mm-hmm.
So we all have an ego, and we can call it an ego or an ego mind or a mind. There's higher mind, there's lower mind, in various philosophies, but it's all mind. It all has the energy of survival. The ego mind is something that has been with us since the beginning of organic life.
Yes.
So, and it is based in survival. Its function is to make sure that the physical form stays intact. Otherwise we would just sit in the peace and the beauty and, not feed ourselves and fall over eventually and, merge back into all that is, but we don't. We make sure to pay the rent, and we're driven to get what we need and run away from what is going to harm us. So that aspect of consciousness lives in duality, because duality is me or you, live or die. In duality, things are in separation, and it's based in fear. So the qualities of the ego are thought, emotion, memory, perspective, desires, aversions, things like that.
So would it be fair to say the ego is the thing that individuates us, the thing that makes us separate from the rest of the universe? Is that?
It makes us think we're separate,
Okay.
But we're really not.
Right.
But it is our sense of identity. This is where I stop and you begin.
Right.
Everything else begins. But it's not really true. But here's what we do. We've got this. This is what I call a reality bubble. And we each walk around in one of these. This picture I'm drawing is the way I perceive this journey in consciousness that I've been on my entire life. So here we are in here, and this is made up of this area, this white area in here. It's made up of all of our ego stuff, which is our childhood, our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions. And it's also whatever access we have to infinite consciousness. So infinite consciousness is what we really are. However much access we have to that, we are generous. It is our lovingness. It is our innate goodness. It is our desire to serve others. All of that comes out of our true nature, which is infinite consciousness. So another name for infinite consciousness is, I'm going to try to write it, reality. I've never used this whiteboard thing, but I just love it.
I'm impressed. I didn't even know this was a possibility.
Yeah. Well, it's great for talking about this stuff because, you can hardly talk about it. And it's always been a difficulty. Like, how do you explain this kind of stuff? I can show someone, I can guide someone, but I want to start really saying, okay, here's the picture. Like, here's the map. So problems are in here. They are a function of the paradigm. Our view of the world is in here. We in here are having this experience that we call reality. And how we view what we think is out here is actually in here. We're actually looking at our own thoughts and our own perceptions and our own stuff. And none of this stuff is new. I mean, we have been learning this from great spiritual teachers for eons. Right. But I think this is accessible to all of us, to the most ordinary, flawed human beings possible, because I'm one of them. So I know that this is possible, that we can all start looking at this. And so problems happen inside the paradigm. They're a function of that. The way out of a problem, basically, and this is what I realized when I was around 22 or so, and I just said, well, I'll just let it kill me. I just won't exist if that's what's going to happen. What I did was I went to the edge and I just went past it. And then what happens is you're in infinite consciousness. You've gone past the boundary that you've set, that the ego has set, called myself. And all of a sudden you've got this bigger view.
Yeah, I'm curious about this whole experience. You let the despair in, and instead of getting overwhelmed by the despair, you felt connected to everything.
Well, I did get overwhelmed by the despair. Okay. Like, it did get me. So I'm sitting there. I would go sit in this beautiful kind of mountain place, and I was sitting there, and I felt the despair, and I just thought, well, I've been working on this for a long time. I've gone to a lot of therapists. I feel horrible. I'll just and it felt like I was trying to avoid this experience inside me. And I thought, well, I won't try to avoid it. I'll just let it get me, because it was always trying to encroach on me. That's what it felt like. So I said, okay, I surrender. You can have me. And it did. It got me. But then I thought, well, I'm still here. Not the body, not the emotion, not anything. I am still here. I am aware. It didn't get me, even though I let it get me. And what had happened, or the way I envision it and the way I talk about it, is that I went up to this edge and I walked off. And see, that's the thing that I realized we can do over and over and over and over. And I know that because I've been doing this with people for 32 years. Because what happened is I kept doing it. I just kept doing it. Whatever seemed like a problem within me, and I had a lot of them, I just would go toward it. I would just keep poking into it until it would feel so intense, so humiliating, so awful, so whatever. And I would just keep saying, okay, all right, have me. Each time it would be like I would walk through it. And what happens, well, I got to say this first. So then I started asking my friends if they wanted to do this. And so they let me, amazingly. And they would have a similar experience where they would just go into something. And I would do things like I would beat a drum and things like that and kind of make it more and more and more intense. They would go into something and then they would come through it. And then I started offering it as a work, and then it was 32 years later. But the thing that happens, I have to have a different color here for this, is that when we go beyond it, the circle widens. What we call ourselves is greater. We have greater love. We have greater generosity. We have greater joy. The problems clear up. We can see, it's like standing on a ladder at the back of a huge crowd, and all of a sudden you can see, and oh, okay, that's what the holdup is, or whatever it is. And so it seems like, and I think this is true, we can just keep doing this until we come back into the awareness of being infinite. And the ego has zillions and zillions of layers. And so the path seems to be that, we just do it layer by layer, because the ego is very, very scary to walk off this. Yeah. Because this is reality. So we're going to walk off reality? That's what the mind is saying.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm looking at the diagram, it looks. I mean, is the edge that first circle? You know, where the despair lives on the other side of that. I mean, is that edge almost defined by fear? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's defined by fear. And see, we each at the very bottom of it are defined by fear. It's not who we are.
Right.
But how can we find that out? Over time, there are traditional methods for finding this out, like meditation, where we align with infinite consciousness over the ego, and we become more aligned with greater awareness. We become more loving, more joyful, all of that stuff. We have more access to infinite consciousness. Maturity hopefully does that. Sometimes it doesn't, or if the paradigm is shattered. This is a paradigm, it's a construct, it's our viewpoint. And if it's shattered, our house falls in a hole, or our beloved leaves us, our reality is shattered. And we don't have this enclosed, safe space anymore. And so we have to find deeper resources. And sometimes, of course, we just hunker down and get more scared, more angry, more hateful, or whatever. But the opportunity is to grow. So there are all these ways that we evolve in consciousness, but there's a way that we can do it on purpose very rapidly, really. So I'm going to get rid of the whiteboard, unless you want to. Is there anything else I should do here?
No, that's great.
Okay, so we have reality, etc.
It's all clear now.
Yes, good. It's reality explained. Okay.
All right. So. Great. Yeah, I've certainly experienced that shattering. I think existential crisis is the word of.
Yes, right.
And it is. It's one of the. It's God. They're not comfortable, but
no.
You wake up to a bigger world and you're like, oh, my whole idea of how the universe was ordered is incorrect.
Right.
What do I do about that now? And,
right. Well, what did you do about that?
Let's see. I'm not sure. There have been times where, there were times where I felt like I was on a raft in the ocean, Mm-hmm. It's like, I thought I had a boat. The boat sank. Here I am in the middle of infinity, and I don't know which way is north, Mm-hmm. And there were times where it brought me back to, okay, so what's that part of you that's, for lack of a better word, what's that part of you that's eternal? What's that part of you that is still you, mm-hmm. part that still exists, There were times where, there was one time where it was, just anguish for several years. And I was going down that road of just becoming more bitter, and angry, and realized that wasn't going to change on its own. And I didn't stay that way forever. And, in that particular time, I had to, I'd blown a fuse and I just stopped feeling things. And I actually hadn't felt anything move through my heart in a couple years. And I remember laying down and putting my hands over my chest and trying to put my consciousness back in my heart and feel my heart. And I couldn't actually do it the first time. It was foreign to me. And this is, I've already done, a lot of embodiment stuff and Qigong. Something like that at one point in time was very simple and common, and it became this barrier. I was just terrified to actually feel anything again. And I just consciously, every night I laid down and just almost went through the motions until I started actually feeling things again. Mm-hmm. Kind of snowballed and it took on its own momentum. I think I'm still figuring out how to structure the universe accurately, but I think I'm attached to being right about what I think it is, mm-hmm. Which makes me a little bit more flexible. I don't hold my beliefs as tightly as I used to.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's really powerful. And see, I think you were guided by your true nature and your intention to know truth, that you weren't going to go down this bitter road. You chose not to do that. And then you found a path to find your way back, to find your way into truth. And it's true that our insistence on being right lessens, which is useful. Because really, each time we come out of one paradigm into something greater, we find out there's a greater truth. No matter what we think about anything, there is a greater truth, period. And to the ego, that feels like being wrong. And being wrong equals non-existence.
Can you repeat that last part, please? Being wrong equals non-existence.
To the ego. Because the ego is based on its thoughts, essentially. The constructs of its thoughts, its memories, like its emotions. I feel something about this story. Mm-hmm. That makes me real. Mm-hmm. That's basic ego, very simplified. But there are zillion strands of this going back into biological history forever. And it's part of our nature. It's part of the animal nature. So we're at this very base level, we're operating out of desire and aversion. Those things are thoughts, they're emotions, they're emotional thoughts that don't have a basis in reality. Thought really doesn't. Because in infinite consciousness, there just is. It just is. There is no thought. So no matter what we think, there's a higher truth. Ultimate truth, you can't even think about it. I mean, you can think about it, but you can't think it. So the ego, eventually, we understand from spiritual avatars, dies. And what we can do as regular people is practice kind of jumping off the edge of its reality and of what it calls reality and finding out that is not what I am. That is not what I am. And I am this. But the results are very practical. It may sound kind of esoteric or spiritual, and of course it is spiritual, but it's very practical, because what happens is you get happy. You get happy. I mean, you can see, the problems can clear up. I actually can do something about this. I can see it for what it is. I can see that I was attached to this or whatever.
Well, and I know that it does sound esoteric or spiritual or abstract, but it also, I mean, I know it's not, from my own experience and from having worked with you and Robert. But it also reminds me of I'm trying to remember a quote accurately, and I'm not going to remember it accurately, but in various martial arts traditions, and I'm thinking in particular about some of the Japanese sword traditions. It's like, die every day. That's the goal of training, is to die every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day it'll be another death, and you move on from there. But
we've been on the same path.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful.
Well, it is. I mean, and even just to go back to that martial arts metaphor, it's like, that's how you learn. I think I'm right. I'm going to hit you, and I'm sure I'm going to hit you. And then what just happened? I have no idea how that wasn't supposed to happen,
Right.
You just have to get comfortable with learning that you don't actually know what's going on, and then you can start to see what's maybe going on.
Yeah, and you let go. Let go.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. See, I think that this is not uncommon, because we are all on, the thing about human beings is that we can know our source, and it calls to us, and we are following a path. It is not uncommon, but it seems uncommon to speak about it. There are certain kind of traditions that speak about it, but just as an everyday thing, it doesn't seem common to speak about it. But I think that it is common to be on the path in one way or another.
Because, I mean, isn't that part of life? I mean, I suppose the awareness isn't always part of life, but the phenomenon you're talking about it's part of life, of of being constrained and either having existential terror about what's outside of our boundary, or that boundary gets broken open. I mean, lots of people aren't looking for it, and their egg gets cracked open one way or another, and then you have to deal with it.
Right. Yeah. It is not always conscious. It's like our true selves are on the path, but I think it is more and more and more accessible for human beings, and it can be more and more out loud that we can do this.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's easier to, not that it's easy to speak about it, but it doesn't, it's not as, I was going to say dangerous. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think more people are accepting of it, of talking about it, and more people do, are looking for something, a way to connect with source and bring our lives into alignment.
Yes, I think so. And the traditional structures are falling apart.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. So there's that got me thinking. I mean, even so I have these awkward pauses sometimes because I think in three directions and I don't know which way to go. But even when you say traditional structures, I mean, that's true on all levels, and it's true even on the levels of, there's been many structures that have been passed down to contain knowledge and pass on knowledge. A lot of the old religious traditions and esoteric traditions, and and many of them, some of them are certainly still going strong, but it's like even a lot of those things are, I was going to say unnecessary. I don't know if that's the right word, but it, I don't know that everybody needs to become a monk or a nun if you want to, learn a lot of these things. Right.
Yeah, that's true. It seems to be really changing, but also those traditions are starting to fall apart. Like the religions are losing their structure and trying all these new things that really don't hold the true teaching anymore. And, so even if you do want to be a nun or a monk or something, you might find a dead end, or you might find that you're not held in that path. And it's like all these new ways have to open up. We have to find our way.
Yeah.
Like you did, you found your way. And each of us being in touch with that true nature at this deep level, and then finding that is what we can continually know at deeper and deeper levels. That's what's possible.
Yeah. Your experience when you were a kid in the kitchen, it reminded me of my first experience like that was actually during my first lucid dream. And it was this beautiful experience. And it's like I was just me watching a sunset, and somehow everything became alive, like really alive, and I could feel it looking back at me. And it was like I was my body was flooded with elation, and like I was connected to everything I was looking at was connected to me. And then when I realized I was dreaming, I thought, oh wow, this is a dream. And I looked at my body and said, wait, this isn't actually my body, this is a dream. My first thought was, the real me is sleeping in my bed. And it's like part of me tried to connect with that and realized that that's not the real me either. That's another dream. And I reached for something else, and I woke up.
Wow.
Planted the seed of like, what was that other thing?
Yeah.
In this one, and
oh, that's beautiful. That experience, and life is conscious. Life is conscious. I think what's happening now, there's so much polarity and so much anger and so much everything going on. And people are trying to save life, save the world, and do good and all of these things. It's like the way that we often try to affect change doesn't take into account life. It comes from an emotional state, for example. But we're seeking, I think the polarity is a way of saying how collectively we are seeking a way into this peace or into this awareness of how conscious life is. like that we are all seeing, everything is actually aware. It's just that we cut ourselves off. I don't think I was very clear here, so maybe we edit this out. I don't know. But somehow all this polarity that we have going on right now is kind of our collective voice that looks like we're opposed to each other, but collectively we are seeking this awareness that you're speaking about, this awareness that life is conscious and that we are part of everything. And even if it looks like we're in a polarity, we are actually collectively all seeking that. We're all bumping up against our own projections and our own fears and our own stuff. And it's showing up this way collectively.
Well, that sounds encouraging. Yeah, I'm not sure. So can you elaborate? It's like, how does, because you see a lot, there's a lot of anger and a lot of fear and a lot of grasping for control and a lot of, there's a lot of things on different sides, but a lot of it, isn't pretty and comfortable. Like, can you explain how it's actually seeking for this knowledge that everything's actually alive?
Well, it seems like life presents us collectively with a question about what is life? What is life? And it takes us together hundreds of years of looking at it and fighting with each other and killing each other over it to come to an answer. Like slavery is an example. It's like, what is life? And that's always the question. What is life? It shows up in all these different forms. But all the fighting and the killing and the accusations, the acrimony, and all that stuff that we have, we always have all the time with each other. It comes into these peaks when we're addressing some question like that. And then collectively we come to an answer. So what we're doing now, we're in one of those times where we're really, really looking at things like that. And we all think we're right. We all think we're on the enlightened end of things. And ultimately, we will come to some higher level where we will make some kind of collective decision. Like, we will not have slavery anymore. Or we will, whatever, we've got some big questions like that, which we will do, or we won't, how we determine how we go on will be our conclusion after we do all of this together. But we're in it together. We're doing it together.
We are in it together, and collectively we've got some big issues coming.
Yeah.
Just as far as, the economics, the environment, the social control, abortion bills just got passed, or at least proposed. I'm not quite clear on the legalities, but there's a lot of tension, and there's a lot of collective problems. The whole world is looking at some of these things coming down the pike. And it is forcing us to look at everything in a different way.
Yeah. And see, when we look, we have to,
Go ahead.
When we look, or through the process of looking, we have to start examining different angles of things, and the question really is, what is life? Because really, it is all life, except the ego, except the thoughts. All of that is not life. It's just what we think of as reality, but it's not. All is life. And we keep getting the question, what is life? We don't recognize it in a certain form. And then we have a big struggle about it for hundreds of years, or more. And, and it's like, what are we? That's a question. What is life? Like, what are we? We have that question. So it shows up in all different ways, but what we're doing together is like what people do in a marriage that is so powerful. Once you say, I do, and you say with this person, okay, now we have this container that we will throw our projections out upon each other, and we will work them out, like a sword fight or something. And then hopefully, or ideally, the container holds us as we do that, and we come into this higher level of love and truth. And that's what we're doing collectively as well. And all over the world, we're doing this in different ways with different forms of the same question.
Can I back up a little bit? And I want to ask you, because you talked about emotions as part of the ego. And I think that's something that might, I've known a lot of people, well, and I know in my past, at first I wasn't in touch with my emotions at all. And then I started in touch with my emotions, and I thought they were more true than my thoughts. I had accepted that a lot of my thoughts were not necessarily true, but I thought my emotions were true and real. And can you talk about how that's not necessarily the case? I mean, you categorize them within the ego, and I think I know what you're talking about, but I think that might be a fuzzy point for a lot of people.
Yeah, I understand. And I had a very similar experience too, of not feeling anything and then starting to feel. It's like, oh. And then it seems like the emotions can guide us into a greater truth. Mm-hmm. And so they seem more true or less egoic. And so we can honor them in that way, and we can use them, and they can be part of the path. But with anything of the ego, it's very easy to get stuck there and to stay there, because egos love emotions. Emotions are really fun. Emotions actually will justify the ego's existence. It's like, I have this emotion and it is about this, and therefore I can experience my own existence by having this emotion. So emotions will lead us to something that's unconscious, because in this path, in kind of the approach that I use of the little circle and the arrow going past the circle, when we're jumping off the edge of the world, if we start really examining a problem, like any problem, you can just take anything, and if you start really looking into it, you'll get into deeper and deeper stuff. And it can be really, really useful and necessary to go through it, to go into it and know it and let it touch you. But then not let it entice you into staying there, because it will want to do that, because the ego will feel comfortable in that. But really, with emotions, just like with thoughts, what we find out is there's an awareness that is not the emotion. There can be great sadness or great fear or something like that. And deeper than that, we can notice that we are aware of the feeling. We're not the feeling. We're aware of it. So what's that? That is I. That is awareness, is not the feeling. And then we realize, well, I'm not that feeling. And we can start seeing then how they're kind of playing a game sometimes, and we're using them in order to avoid something, or in order to justify an action, or some other reason. We're not using them for our evolution or to serve life. They never really do serve life. They will serve us in becoming more aware for a certain time. Mm-hmm. And love, I'm not including as an emotion. Love is life. Love, it just is. Unconditional love. It just is. Like joy is like that. That experience that you described of joy, mm-hmm. That's not an emotion. That's life. That's life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is it fair to say, well, I guess let me rephrase. So when dealing with emotions, for some of us, emotions can be overwhelming or mm-hmm. strong and easy to get swept in the current. And I think maybe why a lot of folks were kind of looking for to become better, put maybe so much weight on emotions, is because for a lot of folks in this culture, there's a background of just emotional suppression, and so I don't hear you saying that. Obviously, saying use them, watch them arise, and if you dive into them, you'll see what's underneath it, and to just not get trapped by by the feeling of the emotion or to identify too much with the emotion, but to use them, that they are actually useful in kind of that greater goal of, all right, does that make sense?
Yes, exactly. You said it really well. And it does seem to be necessary as part of the path, especially if you've hidden from your emotions or if you've been numb, walked around numb. I thought of myself that way too, as being numb. I would think I am just a head with this body underneath, and there's not a thing I can feel. And I was very proud of that. But then starting to feel it was very much part of the path to find out what all that was about and go through it. And so, yes, I think it can be a necessary part, but it's not the goal. It's not the be all end all. Once you're done with them, but you stay with them, then they will use you to do negative things, for example, to stay in negativity, because they're essentially negative. They're fear, anger, not good to cultivate.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I got from working with Robert, and I'm assuming you see things the same way, was just that sometimes we look for an excuse to let out the emotion that's hiding, that was already there. And we take a circumstance as an excuse to let that emotion, to feel that emotion.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to express the emotion in whatever the situation. It makes us feel powerful, or we can be seen, or we can have someone feel sorry for us, or, whatever the payoff is. And that's when it's a negative aspect. It's not furthering life. It's not contributing to life to do that, to our own lives either.
Well, I love that concept that love is not an emotion. That's one of the things I do in my work is to look for baseline. With things like posture, I'm looking for a baseline with a movement pattern, and even with one of the things that I got exposed to, it was a concept, and it took me a long time of working with it, but it's just the concept that the baseline. I'm probably using the terms differently, but to me, the baseline emotion it's not bland, it's not flat. It's the silent joy of being alive, and that sounds like what you're talking about. That's actually our state. It's not emotionless. It's full of joy simply for existing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's the nature of life.
Yeah. So,
and you can see that in life. Life is in that joy. You can see it. You can see it in the leaves of a plant. If you really look, you can see this. This is going to sound, I guess that sounds woo-woo, but you can feel, if you really, like when you came into your experience, you could feel the joy that was present everywhere, not just in you. Right. Is that right?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that could sound woo-woo if one hasn't experienced it. But I know what you're talking about. It reminds me of time I met actually somebody I interviewed recently, this fellow Derek Jensen, and he's an author. And I'd met him years ago when he was on a book tour, and I asked him something related, and he just picked up a grape. And I watched him go from talking person professionally, I'm here promoting my thing, to getting completely absorbed in the miracle that made this grape. And it was watching a little kid see it for the first time.
Yeah.
That impressed me. I was like, wow, yeah. Years like that. But yeah, so that's something ideally I would like to strive to do that. I don't know how, I definitely seems like you need an off button. I don't know if I could make it through my day maybe I could. Maybe that's the fear.
If you were what?
If I was completely enraptured in existence, would I still do all the things that I need to do?
Right, exactly. Yeah. How do you function with that? Yes. Yeah.
Maybe that's Maybe that's why we have these other states of mind. So you talked about paradigm a little bit. Is that something you feel like you could elaborate on a little bit about how our personal paradigm influences our experience?
Yes. Why don't I do that? We each live within a perception of reality made up of our thoughts, emotions, experiences, memories, everything that we call ourselves. And it is a paradigm like the framework of a house. And it seems like home. And what we will do is build our house, or our house will end up, or we'll move into a house that is in a neighborhood with a zillion other houses that look just like that. So that everything that we hear, everything that we see is all the same. It fits our paradigm. If there's something outside the paradigm, we will be very angry or very scared about it. So there's a wonderful, famous, and very profound fable out of India that talks about paradigm in the way that I understand it. And it is I think it's six, I don't know how many, blind men and an elephant. Right. And they had never experienced an elephant. So the blind men approach this thing and they each grasp a certain portion, the tail, the ear, the tusk. So each one has this reality, so for one, this is a rope. We have encountered a rope and he knows he is right. He absolutely knows he is right. One has encountered a fan and one a sword, the tusk, and so on. They all know they're right. And they are all blind. That is our state in our paradigm. We are all blind because when the veil is lifted and we step back, if we even put a toe over that paradigm, like we actually take the risk of having another viewpoint of saying, well, can I walk over there and see what you're, or feel what you're experiencing? If we actually do that, which feels too dangerous, but if we do, we have the opportunity to come into a greater paradigm. And that is an elephant. A greater paradigm is never anything that we can imagine. Like it's common to think that we can understand another paradigm, so now it gets into higher and lower paradigms, which is interesting. Like an elephant is a higher paradigm. You see more of the whole, you see more of the truth of the elephant. And at the lower paradigm, where you're just getting a little piece of it, there is no way you can imagine an elephant. If you've never seen one before, you can just not imagine it. But once you see it, you say, oh, it's an elephant. Of course, I get it. But you could never have imagined it before. And it's like that with paradigms. When you're coming into something greater, you can never imagine it before. And we all, at an ego level, the ego will always think it is right, even if it is approaching a higher truth, like honest and dishonest. They're two different paradigms, right? So honest is actually a higher paradigm than dishonest, because honest is more about oneness. It takes into account the reality that we are all one. And anything that you take, for example, is really taken from the whole. You are only harming yourself. So in honesty, there's a greater understanding of that. Dishonest, is more attached, more connected to duality, me or you. I'm going to hide this from you and I will gain and you will lose, and that's my goal. That is a lower level. But dishonest will think that honest is an idiot. Dishonest knows it's right. Dishonest knows that honest probably just has a better game and he hates honest for that, and so that's what's so brilliant, I think, about the whole structure of the ego and paradigms and things like that. It's like a board game in a way, where we all have this piece. We're all somewhere, and we encounter something. We have all these reactions. If we encounter something that's beyond us, we will assume it matches something in us because that's all we can see.
Mm-hmm.
So we will see honest being dishonest, for example, but just having a better game. Or we will see honest being an idiot, but we won't see honest as what it really is, which is a higher level, because we can't see that. It's just not in our capacity. So paradigms are like that. They are mind-blowing to go beyond them. And that is the thing that we can all consciously do. In a personal way, a way to talk about it personally is like if we have a personal problem, like we're having a lot of emotion about something that happened when we were a child. That is a paradigm that we are in, of grief, fear, feeling like a victim, which we may have been, whatever it is, but that's a paradigm that we're in. So we can approach it as something to examine, find its basis, and then find our way through it by letting it get us in a way. Because whenever any kind of personal issue like that, it always feels like it is something we can't handle, really. And so if we say, okay, then it can have me, it takes the power out of it. We're not standing away from it, staring at it, fighting it, avoiding it. We let it get us, and then we realize this deeper truth, and we come through that paradigm, just like the blind men and the elephant.
So I get what you're saying in the abstract, but when I feel it as you're talking, I mean, that's terrifying. I mean,
yes, it's terrifying. That's right.
Yeah, and it does feel like, I mean, especially in things like childhood abuse and things like that, where it's like, God, even to think about that feels scary. To really feel it, So when it's something, when there's some kind of trauma that's unresolved, I mean, not to ask for a blanket statement, but it's like, if it's grief I'm hiding, is the cure to just sob my eyes out for as long as they can and see what is there left? Or, I mean, is it that sort of thing? Just, or if it's angered, like just go beat up a punching bag until you're exhausted? Or, I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but is it kind of like that? I mean,
expression can sometimes be part of the path, but it's not like that so much.
Okay.
It is like with some kind of childhood trauma, for example, it's traumatic. What I did on my own, and then I started doing this with people, but what I did on my own is I would say, okay, this is really traumatic, whatever this thing is. What does it feel like if I let it touch me? If I actually, instead of trying to avoid it, it's like this awful, horrible, creepy, humiliating, terrible feeling. Now what happens if I let it touch me? Okay, all right, it feels like that. And that might be as far as I can go. And then I do it a little more. And I keep doing it until I realize, oh, this does not have power anymore. It's like that. It's sitting back objectively and realizing you're not that. Because what we do is we think we are it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're in this internal fight about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in a sense, it reminds me of one time Daniela, who she wrote something that really upset me. She said, read it and then read it again and keep reading it till it doesn't bother you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Very smart. I wanted to ask you to give her my regards.
I will. Definitely will.
Yeah.
So it's just little by little. It's more about taking the charge out of it than about fully expressing the emotion or anything like that.
In a way, see, what we all do is we see whatever it is over with. It's not harming us anymore.
Right.
I mean, it's just not. And life is eternal. We are not harmed, really, when you come down to it. It always comes down to the ego losing its idea of reality, and that feels like non-existence. And since we're attached to the ego, to let the story go, to let the story touch us. Because what we do is we have the emotion and then we imbue the emotion with a story, the story of this terrible thing that happened. That was indeed terrible. But then we just keep it and we keep it and we identify with it. And if we're going to lose that, we will die. We will no longer exist. That fear of non-existence is always there for the ego, because ultimately it will not exist. It knows that in its little heart of hearts. And I think, so that's the thing that we can get to. That's the doorway to enlightenment. And if we can find that doorway, and we can use any story, any thought, any emotion, anything, we can use it to find that underlying fear of non-existence. That's what's always there. And then we can say, well, I'll just walk through this door one more time. And it always feels the same. It's always the same. It's always this, the fear shows up in different ways. Like people will say, I'm going to be annihilated. I'm going to be destroyed. I'm going to be lost in the void alone. It sounds awful. I mean, how can you, promote this work? It sounds horrible, but, but, all of that fear and darkness is only fear and darkness. It's not reality. That's the thing. It's not reality. And to walk into it over and over, and after a while, there's no content to it. You just say, here it is. I will just open up the solar plexus and the heart. I won't avoid it. And you walk through, and it's 2 seconds. And it becomes just part of the path. So that's the goal more. We can use these, we can heal things completely this way. And more than that, we can use them to find this doorway.
Nice.
Yeah. By the way, I was going to not have this stuff in the background because I thought it looked a little too, I don't know, something. I was going to have just a nice plant or, a bare wall. I don't know. But then I thought it's completely appropriate because this is my office. Yeah. And the painting was done by a student, a dear student of Robert's and mine, Robert Lebendiger, for those of you who don't know, that I worked with for the last 30 years. Each time he came to a meeting, he had an assignment to bring a finger painting every week. And so this was one he brought, and it's called All the Stories Are the Same. And I just thought that's so appropriate because it is, with the ego, there can be any story, but they are all the same.
Yeah.
And then the mask is from a gallery of a dear friend, Cincy, from whom I bought this. And it is called The Seer, but it is not looking out, it is looking in. So that really says this can be our path, to recognize the stories for what they are and use them to find that inner path, which leads to infinity.
Yeah. Be aware of your time. We're 10 past 4.
Okay. Shall we go?
If it's up to you. If you have a few more minutes, we could go a few more minutes, or if it's time.
If there's something, it's fine to go a few more minutes. And if we feel done, that's fine too. Right. Either way. Right. Do you have is there a question, or is there more we should talk about?
Well, I feel like you just kind of wrapped it all up really well, right?
Okay.
With the last end, but that is something that struck me about you and Robert's work, is that you're not that interested in the specifics of the story, which most people find shocking. When I've told them about, how would I even get into all this stuff? I'm like, they don't care. What? That might not be the right way to phrase it, but but it's interesting how much it doesn't. The specifics of the story aren't the critical piece.
No, they're not. They never are.
Yeah.
So if a person is really dedicated to the truth, to truly healing, which not everybody is, it's a lot more fun just to be wounded, really. And a lot of times. I've definitely played that out. I totally understand. It's great to have an excuse, so to not live life, to not be in the risk of life. But yeah, if you come to the point where you really do want to heal and you want to live like you did, the story is not so important, really. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much.
thank you. It's really a pleasure to talk with you.